I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. At the 40. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25, 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And then the cannons come. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Welcome back, Bucs fans, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast live on YouTube today. I am your host, Rhett Matthew. Joining me today, a writer-reporter for BucsGameday with Sports Illustrated and the host of the Sick Podcast, Pirate Parlay, returning guest, JC Allen, back on the podcast. JC, pleasure to have you, my friend. Excited to chop it up with you today.
Absolutely. Always happy to be here. Chop it up. Talk some Bucs. We're in full swing. We got, 24 days away now? 25 days away till the kickoff. So inching ever closer here.
Yeah, I know. It's that final home stretch before the start of the regular season where football's back. It's not officially back. We've got preseason football. We've got joint practices like the one we're going to talk about today. But once the season starts, once we're in week 1 of the regular season, I feel like you blink and then you're in week 10 talking about the playoff chase. So we got to savor these moments while we can. And today we've got a lot to get into regarding the Tampa Bay Buccaneers up in Jacksonville this week, practicing with the Jags ahead of their Saturday preseason game. And this is the first joint practice of the preseason for Tampa Bay. And the exciting thing about a lot of these joint practices is that outside of an actual preseason games, these are probably the most important reps these guys are going to get, especially the guys who are fighting for a roster spot. Not a bona fide starter, guys still looking to make the team. You get a chance to square off against another team. These guys test their craft against players that they don't get to see every day. And one of the most fun parts of joint practices is seeing players get chippy, seeing the fight, seeing guys go at it, jawing off at each other. And JC, it seems like there wasn't really much of that today. Antoine Winfield spoke to the media after practice, but I mean, most of the people who were there, you can see for yourself, it was a pretty clean practice. Aside from KJ Britt jawing off at Trevor Lawrence at one point, I don't think there was any pushing or shoving today.
Yeah, day ones are usually kind of feel each other out days. Day two is when you'll go back 2 years ago when the Bucs hosted the Miami Dolphins. Day one was one of those feel your out days, and then day two, I remember at a rookie at that time, Luke Gedeke was in the middle of a lot of those fights. So yeah, I mean, we'll see if that continues on until tomorrow. Jacksonville is another hot place to play. It's not like it's, they're up north in cool weather. So we'll see if tempers start to boil over there. KJ Britt, he's going to talk his crap. He does it in practice against Baker in the offense. So him doing it in Jacksonville is no surprise there. But, we'll see if it continues tomorrow. I think that's the thing. The first day of practice, you're always kind of just feeling out okay. And especially when you start off a little sluggish, like the Bucs, reportedly did today, you kind of don't have a leg to stand on there. So we'll see. I expect probably at least 1 or 2 skirmishes tomorrow. But clean day for day one is good. It shows everyone's disciplined, focused, and, taking it serious. And tomorrow should be a fun day.
Yeah, Bucs certainly going to have to respond in more ways than one. As you alluded to, kind of a slow start today for the Bucs. Wasn't the best day of practice. We'll talk about the defense first, but I mean, it seems like practice started the same way that first preseason game did against Joe Burrow. Trevor Lawrence went out there with his offense, and he went to work. Brian Thomas was making plays all day against this secondary, had a big-time touchdown over Kayvon Merriweather, made a big play earlier in the day against Zion McCollum, but Trevor Lawrence kind of missed him, overthrew him a little bit, but regardless, he had beat him. Backup quarterback C.J. Beathard found Elijah Cooks over the top for a big-time touchdown against Josh Hayes. Even later in the day, into red zone work, Josh Hayes was one of those guys in the secondary getting picked on today. So for a secondary that, we were talking a lot about the young guys. We were excited about the plays that they were making during Buccaneers training camp. But the first preseason game against Cincinnati, and so far this first joint practice against Trevor Lawrence and the Jags, it's been a tough going for some of these young guys.
Yeah, I think with Josh Hayes, it's a little complicated because he played nickel and safety in college last year. Kind of did the same thing. Was more of a core special teamers, but more of a nickel cornerback. So he's making the move to the outside. So you expect there to be bumps and bruises and growing pains. And hey, Brian Thomas Jr. is no slouch. I think he was one of the guys that if their targets weren't there and he was there for the Bucs at 26, I think they probably would have ran that card in because I think he has legitimate shot to be one of the next great wide receivers we're talking about here in a couple of years. So, again, it's not terribly terrible if your fourth cornerback is getting beat by a guy of his caliber. But I think too, again, it's also kind of one of those feeling out days, right? You've been going up against your own team for so long. You get some very vanilla looks in the preseason against the Bengals, but you kind of learn their ins and outs and what they like to do and their tendencies and stuff like that. And the offense is always going to have the upper hand on the defense. It's just always going to be for defense technique and playing through sound and your assignments. And again, it's hard to. The thing I've learned more as I first of all get to know Bull's defense, because Bull's defense is not like another defense where you can just point to one person or point to one thing and say that's what went wrong. It so heavily relies on communication and guys knowing where they're supposed to be, and those roles can reverse depending on the play, depending on the series. So it's making me kind of take a step back and say, well, it looks like it was on this guy, but if this guy didn't follow his cues and what he was supposed to do, and whether their roles reversed on this call or this situation, it's harder for me to really kind of point a finger at who it is and whose responsibility it is. A guy gets behind him, but maybe he's got corner help or safety help over the top, and safety doesn't play it right. And we saw that a lot last year with Ryan Neal. But it kind of like, it makes it a little bit more difficult, and the pressure too, and you're not sacking the quarterback too. So they're playing through the reps most of the time. So, were they beat? Sure, it looks like it. But was that a play that would have been ruled a down, a sack, or was it something that it would have been, an incomplete pressure or something like that? So it's hard to kind of look at it through just the negative light. Obviously, you don't want your top cornerbacks, Zion McCollum, getting torched. Obviously, you don't want, the guys who you have faith in that if someone goes down, step up to play poorly. But I kind of look at it in a different light, unless I get my eyes on it. And unfortunately, I'm not out there today. So just kind of going on what my amazing colleague River Wells wrote about and talked about, and some of the other great members of the Buccaneers media talked about today and what happened. It's not good, but now they got to look, right? They got to look. So now tomorrow you got to go out there and capitalize.
Todd Bowles, his ability to put guys in the best position to contribute for their team. And while we are talking about these young guys in that defensive back room, wanted to get your thoughts on rookie DB Tyke Smith, who is a guy that, I feel like we're just going to see him a little bit of everywhere, right? He has that ability to potentially step in and play nickel corner. He could be a Swiss Army knife safety for Todd Bowles. We've seen how creative he can get in drawing up different defensive fronts. I'm excited to see where this kid can come in and be a part of things. But as far as the rest of the preseason goes, what are you looking from him in particular? And what are you looking at, or what are you hoping to see, I guess, from the rest of these young DBs? Because there's a lot of other guys in this rotation here. Names like Tyreek Funderburk, Josh Hayes, obviously, Rashad Wisdom, just a couple of names to throw out there. May not be as close to making the team as a Tyke Smith. But these younger guys, what are you looking for here throughout the rest of the preseason?
I think it's funny with Tyke Smith. There's a lot of hype about him once he got drafted. And once he got into like rookie minicamp and then OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and now even the first couple of weeks of training camp, it seems like that hype has kind of gone away. And not because people aren't excited about him, it's because people are like, oh, it's Tyke Smith. He knows what he's doing. He's a veteran. He's like, you listen to all these cornerbacks and secondary guys talk about him and coaches, and they're like, he just knows what he's doing. It reminds me a little bit of a Kalijah Cansey last year. And we saw the impact Kalijah Cansey had on the field. So, Tyke, he played, I think, really well. He had that one mistake that was accredited to Josh Hayes, the pass interference call. Just got to get your head around. But I think it was a good play to get himself in position. But you got to turn your head around. And that's something that you learn in mental mistake. And you take it, you look at it, you learn, and you move on. So I'm not worried about Tyke Smith. I think he's going to be the starter at nickel. I think he's going to be employed a variety of different ways. Remember, he played that star linebacker, allows you to get guys, like Christian Izien or Kayvon Merriweather or, Tavier Thomas on the field and have different looks you can do with guys who are multiple and diverse. All those guys are being cross-trained at different positions. It looks like, Kayvon Merriweather is that true backup at strong safety if everything holds. Christian Izien's looking like potentially that true backup behind Antoine Winfield Jr., while Tavier Thomas he can play both safety spots and he's that backup there at nickel. So we'll kind of see how things work itself out the last couple of weeks. But I'm not worried about Tyke Smith. Josh Hayes, again, he didn't have a great outing. He was part of that pass interference call that set up the T. Higgins touchdown and then just slipped in coverage. Wasn't even make a tackle attempt. But again, he's making that transition, so I give him a little leeway. Tyreek Vandenberg, though, is a guy who, if he doesn't step up his game, and Josh Hayes led the NFL, not rookies, led the NFL in special teams tackles. So that's a very telling stat. He actually got an All-Pro vote last year. So we know he can be one of those core special teamers, but when you're looking at the cornerback depth and looking at the outside guys, you got Bryce Hall, who hasn't had a great camp so far. And then Josh Hayes is penciled in, but Tyreek Vandenberg is coming up with more and more ways to not have the Buccaneers put him on this 53-man roster. And it continued with some good play during Cincinnati game. And, hopefully we'll continue to hear good things about him during this joint practice section. And then you kind of look, I think Chris McDonald and Andrew Hayes, they had really rough outings. Obviously, Andrew Hayes, was the more talked about one, but Chris McDonald was out of place several times. If there was some connection between, not Browning, whoever the other guy was at quarterback, I can't remember his name. For Cincinnati?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Woodside.
So Woodside, hit some of his wide receivers. That would have looked worse on McDonald's there too. So I think they've got an uphill battle to even make the practice squad, but two other guys you mentioned, one of them, Rashad Wisdom, and I think Marcus Banks. Marcus Banks played really well this past week. Actually, I think finished the number 3 overall PFF grade for the Bucs on defense. And Rashad Wisdom has been a playmaker. He's made interceptions. He's made forced fumbles. So I think that's going to be a fun competition to see which one of those guys make it onto that 53-man roster. War of attrition. You got to have guys you feel comfortable with. But on the whole, I think the secondary is going to be fine. I think what Antoine Winfield Jr. and what Jordan Whitehead do can really make up for a lot of what some of the other guys maybe can't do. Jamel Dean, if he can stay healthy, he's, again, in a scheme that fits him. If they can get pressure, allow him to play a little bit more press man, he's one of the best to do it in the NFL. And Zion, we've just kind of seen Zion take tremendous growth and coming into year 3. I think he's going to be fine too. So, I'm not too worried about the secondary as far as starters go. Depth is still concerned. But I think at least the starting secondary should be good. Nickel, they're fine. Safety, they're fine. Outside cornerback, you need to see more from Josh Hayes, and Tyreek Vandenberg is working his way into that conversation for the 53-man roster.
Some valuable reps between now and the end of the weekend for sure. Let's talk about the defensive line and the rest of the defensive unit for Tampa Bay. Seemed like a decent practice today for the Bucs defensive line. No doubt it wasn't by any means consistent, but the pressure showed up. And, they made it work when they were able to make it happen. Kalijah Cansey was not out there today, but in the middle of that defensive line, Vita Vea had a very strong day against the interior Jacksonville offensive line. New Tampa Bay Buccaneer Jay Person also made a play in the backfield, and second-round pick out of Bama, the pass rusher position, Chris Braswell, made a couple of plays as well. Again, pressure was not consistent, but reportedly in bursts, it got home. Now, this pass rush has been, again, another huge talking point after that first preseason game, especially because last week when you put on the tape and you watch the game again, it doesn't seem like much of anyone did anything to stand out on that pass rush, and that's concerning. I think maybe Jose Ramirez was the only guy who made a couple of plays last week. But without a doubt, the Bucs have to be better at rushing the passer this week. Taking a look at what Trevor Lawrence was able to do in the early window, he was slicing the Bucs up, and the defensive line, the lack of pass rush definitely had something to do with that. Your overall thoughts on this Buccaneers pass rush as it stands right now? A couple of question marks A couple of question marks. The Randy Gregory thing seems so far away from the other concerns. The Bucs haven't pass rush, but Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the injury to Yaya Diaby, where's your head at regarding the Buccaneers pass rush?
It's tough because we haven't really seen them all on the field against a different opponent, right? In practice, they looked really good. We're getting after the quarterback right before pads came on. Then pads come on, and they lose Yaya Diaby a couple practices later to that high ankle sprain. Then you have Joe Tryon-Shoyinka working with a shoulder sprain that's kind of limited him in practice. So it's kind of tough to get a great read on it now. Kalijah Cansey's missing practice. So it's kind of get a tough read on it when you don't have all your guys out there. And hopefully, obviously Yaya won't be back, but maybe, Cansey, whatever he's ailing with. And JCS will be back for the Dolphins next week, who have a decent offensive line. They lost Robert Hunt and Connor Williams, but they do have some good guys out there. Teron Armstead, a couple of these other players that they have as well. But I think the way Bowles runs his defense with guys like Tyke Smith and Jordan Whitehead and Antoine Winfield Jr. and Levante and certain things they'll do with KJ Britt and Servassier Dennis, they don't need. I'm not saying they don't need. Every team needs a double-digit sack guy. I think that help makes, but I think they don't. The pressure isn't on them as much to rack up double-digit sacks, because I think the sacks are going to come from everywhere. But again, you would like to see more growth and more consistency out of these guys. A lot of the time last year, when looking back, I talked to Shaq Barrett about this. He said, even when we got pressure, by the time we got there, the ball was out. They knew that we were going to bring the pressure from multiple areas. So the ball was gone before we could even, finish a sack. So the pressures were there. You look at the pressures the Bucs were able to do, they were there, converting them into sacks. And we heard a little bit about today about the guys, Chris Braswell, even Jose Ramirez, after a strong showing, who had Jackson Carmine and Knots last week against the Bengals. He was out there, made a sack on Beathard. And some of these other guys are stepping up as well. It's hard to get a beat on until the entire group is out there as a whole, but I think they'll do fine. I think, if you can get 40 sacks, 45 sacks out of this group, and including the entire front seven, I think you're in a good position, and you fill up the rest of the way with the other guys somewhere around there. They've been taking care of their bodies, putting themselves in a position. JTS and Yaya are in the best shape they've ever been. Vita Vea is in the best shape he's ever been. Kalijah Cansey understands the game. It's slowed down for him. I think Chris Braswell is kind of a work in progress, working off raw athleticism now. Anthony Nelson is going to give you 2 to 5 sacks a year, steady Eddie. And we'll see if these guys, Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez, they step up and how they contribute as well. But I think when I look at the defensive line and the edge group and the linebacker group, I'm not really too concerned about the depth there. I'm not too concerned about the production there. I think it will come. It might not come in the ways we expect it to. And I still think if, they're not going to go out and get a Hassan Reddick, so slow your roll on that, guys, or a Matthew Judon. But I think if the opportunity presents itself for them to get, a double-digit sack guy next year in free agency when they have a little bit of money, I think they'll look at that, and I think that's kind of one thing that could take this room to the edge. But the depth is there. I think the way Bowles utilizes his players is there, and I still think they'll do pretty well, getting after the quarterback for the season. It just might be the most conventional route.
Joe Tryon-Shoyinka is one of those players that I think a lot of people have their mind made up on by now. We've seen a couple of years of this guy at outside linebacker, and kind of like what you said earlier, the pressures are there, but he just hasn't been quite as productive as the Bucs would have hoped he'd be, especially at this point of his career. Now, he's in a contract year, and the Bucs are in a situation where, just like you said, they could have plenty of money this time next year to go pony up and get a 10-plus sack guy. But what does JTS have to do this year to change the minds of the people who have already made up their mind about him? It seems like we had this discussion with Matt Matera last week, and it ultimately seems like he could go out for the Bucs this year. He could get 7 sacks, and the Bucs ultimately might find themselves in a position where they would be better off moving on. What are your thoughts on where he stands?
Yeah, so I think when you look at JTS, I mean, he's super undervalued in certain areas of the game. He's one of the best coverage outside linebackers in the NFL, not just on the Bucs, and he continues to set the edge tremendously. So I think those are two areas of his game that are constantly overlooked. You look at him, 30 pressures, 30 plus pressures, consistently throughout his career. Remember, you got to remember too with Joe, he was given the opportunity last year, but his first 2 years in the league, first of all, he didn't play the COVID year. He really only had 1 year of production. He comes in, JPP's banged up, so he's splitting times at outside linebacker, playing a lot of 3-tech because, when JPP was out there, even though he was banged up, they wouldn't make the move and have JTS go out there. His second year, he comes in, he's the starter now, but Shaq Barrett goes down halfway through the season. So teams aren't like, oh, let's pay a little extra attention to Anthony Nelson. They're doing it to the first round freak athlete. Look at this guy, looks like an action figure. So he's dealing with, some tight end chips and stuff like that, and a little more attention to him his second year. Then last year, he just kind of got outworked by Diaby, I think, and it was kind of, unfortunate for him. They took the steps this season to get better, but I think you're right. Even if it is 7.5 sacks, I think for the Bucs, that's still going to cost you like 12 to 13 million. And do you want to put that on, do you want to spend it on that type of player? Another team will. He's a first round pick with a first round pedigree. Again, one of the best coverage linebackers out there. One of the best linebackers at setting the edge and consistent with pressures. So, maybe someone feels like in a less complicated scheme like Todd Bowles with more opportunities to rush the passer, he could, to put up better sack numbers. But I don't see a way where JTS is back here next year, even if he does ball out. I think, the Bucs probably move on from him. I think his price tag's going to be too high. And I think that's going to be the reason why. I don't think he's going to go out there and someone's going to be like, well, I'll give you $5 million. Based on his pedigree, based on, everything else I just said, I think a team's probably going to willing to be pony up at least $10 million. And I don't think the Bucs want to spend that on JTS. I think they'd rather use that resources somewhere else, see if a big name guy becomes available and spend the money that way.
Yeah, and obviously going to be keeping a close eye on the development of a guy like Chris Braswell. You take him in the second round, you hope that he can potentially become someone that 3, 4, 5 years from now, maybe you got to worry about paying him if he becomes that talented of a pass rusher. But the development is always tricky just because, especially with those edge rushers, sometimes it takes a year and you have a rookie season like Yaya Diaby. Sometimes you try and play edge rusher so long that they kick you inside like a Will Golston. You remember forever the Bucs were trying to make him a 4-3 defensive end, and it just did not work. So it's going to be interesting to see for sure. But before we talk about the offensive side of the football, I want to take this time to let you guys know that today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast is brought to you by Autograph, the app that curates the best content, tickets, and gear to help you fan to your full potential. Being a fan is a full-time job, so Autograph does the heavy lifting for you. From tickets for big matchups to breaking news, the Autograph app has curated contents for fans of all things Tampa Bay Buccaneers. All the podcasts, articles, and game predictions you could ever want, including the Cannon Fire Podcast. The new replay feature lets you get the day's news without the noise and when you need the TLDR to start your day. Use promo code BUCS to download for free on Google Play or the Apple App Store today. Once again, promo code BUCS, B-U-C-S. Download the Autograph app today. I don't know if you've used this app, JC, but I'm going to be honest with you, it's badass. We've had a lot of sponsors and a lot of apps that we've partnered with over the years, but I find myself using Autograph 4, 5, 6 times a day just because it is a perfect community for all the Bucs news I could ever need. I open my feed right here, and I've got all the latest articles, podcasts, videos from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers social team, and all of the other great outlets who have signed up. So check us out over there. Download the Autograph app today. Promo code BUCS, B-U-C-S. And thank you to Autograph for sponsoring the show. Excuse me. Let's talk about the Sorry, go ahead.
I haven't checked out Autograph yet, but I will say back when it was in its infancy days where it was a crypto type deal.
Yeah.
I actually do have some of the crypto tags and stuff like that. Because that's where it kind of got its launch. It was trying to be this new crypto, and Brady had these things,
yeah.
And but I'm installing it right now. So
hell yeah, they took a little bit of a pivot. I can't speak for the whole NFT thing, but it is what it is. But I tell you what, they've really got it dialed in as far as Buccaneer news, and really there's a community for any team any sport, they've got it. So if you want a Bucs feed, you can do that, and then you can switch over to the Jags feed and see what they're saying about joint practices this week.
Perfect.
All right, let's talk about the offensive side of the football today. Kind of like the defense, lackluster, slow start, a lot of drops. We'll get into that, but I wanted to talk about some injury news, JC, and ask if you had heard any potential updates. Tight end Payne Durham left practice early today with a knee injury. The Bucs were going to get it tested, hopeful for any kind of update. I have not seen anything. I'm not sure if you've seen anyone report anything or if you've heard otherwise. But what are your thoughts on Payne Durham's situation? And then behind that, the depth of this tight end room with such a young tight end room.
Yeah, so if Payne's down, you're probably looking the market right now. I don't think they'd feel comfortable with what they have going into a season with a guy like Devin Culp, 7th round pick, and Cope Keefe, who I think is battling for his roster spot. So I think if Payne's down, you're probably scouring the league and saying, all right, does anyone have anyone available that we can bring in here? Or there's nothing on the free agent market. Like there hasn't been anything on the free agent market for quite a while now. I mean, if you kind of look at the position right now, I'll tell you who the best tight end available is, and it's not someone who I think is going to help this team. So you're looking at like Jimmy Graham. You know, I don't think that's necessarily the direction that they want to go. Logan Thomas, Jeff Swaim, Tyler Croft, those guys aren't the ones. I wrote a story a little while ago that if the Bucs were going to look at someone during camp, Harrison Bryant, he's with the Raiders. It makes a lot of sense. They obviously just drafted Michael Maher last year, and they got big Brock Bowers this year. So they're kind of set at 1-2. Harrison Bryant now kind of the forgotten man. He'd fit in the Bucs cap space. I think he's only making like $1.5 million or something like that. Really affordable guy. And I think the chemistry that he already has, remember he played 2 seasons with Baker Mayfield when he was with the Browns. So there's some chemistry there that they can kind of lean on as well. So if they do get bad news with Payne, and I've been kind of checking in myself to see if I could find any updates. You know, once I do, I'll definitely, hopefully I'll get it during the show, but I'll definitely post it. But the depth behind Cade Otton is kind of non-existent. And you even saw that last year, 98% of the snaps for Cade Otton. They just couldn't trust anybody to go out there and be a viable threat as a pass catcher. You know, and quite frankly, a blocker. Everyone looks at Coke Keefe and says, oh, he's a blocking tight end. There's some deficiencies in his blocking game as well. I would, at this point in his career, I would label Coke Keefe more of a special teamer than a true blocking tight end that, you know, you can rely on. Obviously, we'll get into it, had a drop today right off his fingertips.
Yeah.
He's not necessarily a pass catching tight end. You saw that week 1 of the Buccaneers opening season when they went to him back to back. First 2 plays on offense. He's not that guy. You know, he caught 1 catch last year for a touchdown. You know, Payne was looking good, coming up with some good catches, some good blocking. So if he goes down, you know, you got David Wells, who was the number 2 tight end until he wasn't. Then he was on the practice squad. You got Tanner Towler, who hasn't practiced all summer. Sal Canala, the dude from the UFL, who led but has not looked good, really. Hasn't shined. And then Devin Culp, who's made some splash plays, but you can't go into the season with a 6th round draft pick as your number 2 tight end who struggles blocking in line, can do some good stuff in space, but it's a position that they're going to need to look at and kind of figure out which way they want to go if it's something serious with Payne that's going to sideline him for not just, you know, not even the season, but for the first couple weeks of the season, they'll need to get some reinforcement in there.
Yeah, dropped a common theme today for the offense at joint practice. It seems like it even spread to the wide receiver position. Everybody got a couple of drops today. Most interestingly, Jalen McMillan and Trey Palmer seemed like they were having the worst day of everybody. It's interesting because both of those guys fighting for that wide receiver 3 spot. And listen, a bad day at camp is a bad day at camp. You kind of talked about how that first day of joint practice is a feeling out process, but there wasn't much of a rhythm there on the offensive side of the ball in the early going for Tampa Bay, and drops were bad today, which is not something you've heard a lot about so far throughout training camp.
Yeah, and you know that's one thing I think we've talked about over the past, you know, offseason year or so. Consistency needs to be more consistent for Trey Palmer, for lack of a better word. So, and him going out there and having drops, he's in this competition. Is it a true competition? Is it going to be kind of a, back and forth between the two, depending on the matchup? Obviously, Trey's got that speed. So, maybe man coverage, he looks like he could be, better used there. While if they're going up against a team who's playing a lot of zone, Jim McMillan and his ability to find that soft spot. So we'll see what it becomes, what the snap is. I don't think it's going to be anything 60-40. I don't think it's going to be anything egregious, but for both of those guys to have tough days, it's against real competition, right? They went out there against some backups against Cincinnati when they were out there. Now to go, not that Jacksonville secondary is anything great, but to go out there against starters and have some of these, drops and some of these mishaps, it's not very encouraging. But again, they've looked good enough throughout the preseason where I'm not overly worried about it. One day of practice with some drops. If it becomes a trend, then we got some, then you start to worry like, okay, what's going on with these guys? Jalen, you've caught everything thrown your way pretty much. And now you've got a case of the dropsies going forward. That's something that we got to kind of worry about. And then with Trey, you just got to be consistent, man. That's all we need to see from you is consistency. So don't start to backpedal. Don't start to trend the other way when you've been trending, a certain way so well. So they want to practice. If it becomes, consistent, then we worry. Right now, just a bad day of practice.
Yeah, consistency, the key word you had mentioned there. This is a bad day of practice. If it becomes 2 or 3 straight bad days of practice and then it translates into that preseason game, then maybe it's cause for concern. But this is ultimately what the preseason is for. This is what these nitty-gritty practices are for. You would rather get these mistakes out of the way now, have a bad day of practice now, than do so in the regular season, then do so week 2 on the 35-yard line. You'd rather drop these passes now. So it is what it is. But we can wrap things up on a positive note for the offense. It seems like things did pick up throughout the course of the day, and the red zone offense was much better from what we heard. Guys stepped up, had a couple of big-time plays. Mike Evans, of course, was having his way with the Jacksonville secondary, had a couple of touchdowns as well. Cameron Johnson, who returned to practice this week at the wide receiver position, was able to catch a touchdown. And Bucky Irving able to score as well. Now, we've talked a lot about the wide receiver room. I don't think there's much discussion we need to have about a guy like Mike Evans or even Chris Godwin feeling as good as he feels headed into this season. But JC, I wanted to wrap up with your thoughts on Bucky Irving and this quote-unquote new and improved Buccaneers run game. Because again, this is one game of the preseason we are talking about. You don't want to overreact, but with Liam Cohen showing us 5% of the new offense, a lot of people seem to like what they have seen with the run scheme, with the formation, with the interior offensive line. Graham Barton being one of the higher graded, I believe highest graded rookies on the field for any team in the NFL for that first preseason game. So between the offensive line, Graham Barton, Cody Mount getting some reps in that first preseason game, between the offensive line, between Bucky Irving, and of course Liam Cohen being the brainchild behind all of it, what are your thoughts on the run game headed into this week's preseason matchup with Jacksonville?
Yeah, I will say real quick too on the offense, as far as drops and wide receivers and missed passes and stuff like that. It's important to note too that this is the time, these joint practices specifically, is a time for them to kind of do things maybe differently, kind of feel out certain things that they might want to try out during the season. Get it done against an opponent you're not going to see, who's not going to have tape on you. And, if there's a certain look you want on this route, if it's a certain thing you want to try on this route, now is the time to do it. Your defense has seen it over and over and over again in practice. If you're trying these things out, now is the time. We kind of got in the same conversation about it with Baker Mayfield testing things out last year, leading to some interceptions on some of the deep balls and stuff like that. Now's the time to do it during joint practices against teams, different defenses that don't know your tendencies. So it's always good to kind of just keep an asterisk against that when you hear our practice reports come out at BucsGameday or wherever else. You should be tuning to BucsGameday. But wherever else you're also getting them, if you're consuming them all like I am, just kind of keep that in mind, that while it might be woe and, doom and gloom and all that in the reports, we don't know what they're calling. We don't know what's going on in that huddle. And these could be types of different situations. No excuses for drops, but just kind of keep that in mind as well. But as far as the offensive line and the running game, man, I am really excited for it. I know Rachaad White personally, and he is coming back with a vengeance. He's really pissed he didn't get his 1,000 yards last year, and he doesn't want just 1,000 yards. He wants well over that, and he wants to get well over what he got receiving. And you look at what he did towards the end of that season, he was one of the best running backs in the NFL, especially, through the air. So I'm expecting a big season from him. And a big season from the offensive line, mainly because obviously they got a guy like Graham Barton, who you were right, was the best offensive line, highest rated offensive lineman per PFF from the draft this season to hit the field this past week, which is encouraging. There's, for seeing him on that Bucky Irving touchdown run where he got his blocker to a spot, Cody Moak picked him up, pancaked them, and then he takes the safety for a ride to halfway through the end zone to open up that nice hole. That was encouraging. That power, that athleticism. Robert Hainsey's been an anchor for the Bucs, and I don't think he's been as bad as fans think he has. But I mean, we haven't seen athleticism and strength like that from a center position since Ryan Jensen.
Yeah.
So really excited for him. Cody Mock looks like he took a good step. Ben Bredesen looks like he's going to be fine in the run game and in the pass game. So I think one thing helping this Bucs team too is for some of the core guys who are left over with Moak and Wirfs and Gedeke, learning the system last year took a strong adjustment period for them. I had Dave Canales on the podcast last year, and he said, hey, even when we implemented this running scheme in Seattle, it took about half a season to get it down. They're not implementing a new running scheme. They're implementing new terminology and new plays, but it's the same scheme they're running last year. So they're a lot more comfortable. And let's face it, we're not going from Bruce Arians' archaic, old school system to a new school system. It's just kind of transferring over. So they feel comfortable in it, which is why they feel comfortable getting to, their points and where they need to be, and which is going to help open up things for the running game. And Bucky Irving, I think, showed you what everyone talked about. Is I know Trevor Sikkema was, jumping up and down, watching him pinball off defenders. He was one of his biggest supporters last year. So you saw that. And then even further, you saw guys like Sean Tucker, who's been the forgotten guy. Who is he going to even make the team? Is he going to be on the practice squad? People were talking about. One of those people didn't even have him making the team on this 53-man roster. I don't know who that was. Know what I mean? But now you kind of look and say,
Stand by, still waiting to connect. All right, JC, I think we are back. We have done it. We've come back in one piece. We were talking about the running backs there before the show kind of kicked us off, but we are back with a vengeance. Talking about Sean Tucker, talking about how he had one stellar performance week 1 of the preseason against the Cincinnati Bengals. Chase Edmonds has not really been active in Buccaneers training camp so far, so where does that leave this running back room with Bucky Irving already running with a vengeance and Rachaad White looking to play better this year than he has ever?
Yeah, so I think ultimately they'd like Chase to be part of this room. I think the veteran mentorship he brings, the guys really love him. But I think Sean Tucker, he's looked all right in camp, obviously looked great in the game. If he can continue to stack days, stack practices, and stack games like this in the preseason, it's going to be hard for them to leave him off the roster. I had the Bucs in my prediction have only just 3 running backs, and he was in the practice squad. But he certainly caught the attention of some NFL executives, I'm sure now, who were kind of standoffish because of the heart condition last year. And I think that's why he went undrafted, or else, I saw him as potential 5th-round pick. Some people saw him as high as a 3rd-round pick. Before the heart issues, and he was a strong runner at Syracuse. He's the fastest running back on the team that they have. So I think if he continues to do what he show what he showed against Cincinnati, it's going to be hard for them to keep him off the roster. The question comes, is that at the expense of Chase Edmonds, who during his first season with the Bucs couldn't really stay healthy? The first practice that he was out there for the first day of training camp, he looked great. Great burst, had like a real legit 15-yard run even without pads on. You could see just kind of worked his way through the hole. Great pass pro on Antoine Winfield Jr. I talked about that on my podcast, how impressed I was with Chase. But again, your best availability is ability. Your best ability is availability, and you can't make the club from the tub. So he's got to get right sooner rather than later, or maybe it's him that ends up on the practice squad if he's not right away. Instead of putting him on IR, they release him and then kind of slide him back on the practice squad. Let him rehab there and get better there, and then maybe we see him come to the active roster at some point or another. I know he wants to be in Tampa. He's got a great relationship with the guys in the room, especially Rashad. He actively sought them out in 2022, but the Bucs were all set with what they had in the room with Leonard Fournette and Giovanni Bernard. Comes in last year, 2023, and re-signed obviously with him this year. So it's a place where he wants to be. If he can't get right, I think that's probably what we're looking at. Sean Tucker, RB3. Chase Edmonds, gets cut, but as a wink nod, we're going to put you on the practice squad, let him recover, rehab there, and then, utilize him in that veteran mentor role. But another guy I wouldn't rule out to kind of make a push is Ramon Jefferson. I know DJ Williams got the snaps over him. In the beginning, obviously Ramon Jefferson game-winning touchdown, had 2 big catches for them, one for 18 yards. A lot of familiarity with Liam Cohen. Played with him in Maine when Cohen was in Maine before he went to the Rams. And then he played for him in Kentucky the last 2 seasons. Obviously, his first year he torn ACL, didn't really play much last year, recovering from that. But he's a guy who you've seen the explosion, the burst. He can catch the ball well. He's got good drive, that he drove his feet, churned those yards out for that touchdown, that game-winning touchdown against the Bengals. So he's another guy that I would maybe look for a spot on the practice squad, but I think him and DJ are definitely going to be competing. And it all kind of depends on what they do with Chase. Is he too banged up? Does he need surgery? Does he go on IR? Does he get slid to the practice squad? Do they keep 3? A lot of this will be, kind of around how they construct the roster, which is something we're keeping an eye on.
$5 super chat from Joel L. Rican says, "Go Bucs, feels great to have football to talk about again." And I agree. We will wrap up today's episode with one more question for JC here. Want to get your thoughts overall on Baker Mayfield and this Buccaneers offense. What are your expectations for them this season, being realistic? Because we can sit around and talk about all the ways that they should be better, right? This run game should make them better. Better play calling should make this team and this offense better. But you can't account for a lot of things that happen during the season, and you can't account for everything going according to plan. I think Baker's obviously got to be consistent, but this Buccaneers offense has to be consistent in more ways than one. So where are your expectations for them headed into this season? A lot of hype for what they can do well, but at the end of the day, it is a new offensive coordinator and some young guys at some very thin positions, maybe tight end as well.
Yeah, I think they've gotten relatively better this season at some spots with their backup. I think running back obviously is one of them. Wide receiver with the addition of Jalen McMillan is one of them. I think the interior offensive line depth is better. Even with Sua Opeta down, I still think they've got enough guys who can play at a high level there if need be. Kind of reshuffling if you have to. Injury happens along the interior. You have Hainsey that can step in center. You got Barton who can, kick over to left guard. You got Bredesen who can play center. Like, you've got a lot of different flexibility in the interior. I still think the weak points are the weak points. Offensive tackle. If you lose Gedeke or worse, I think you're struggling for a minute. If it's something that's long term, it might derail the entire season. Tight end is another one. I think if Payne is okay, even if he's okay, I think if Cade Otton goes down for a long period of time of the season, I think now you're kind of worrying about that. And obviously Mike, I think you can't afford to lose Mike. Then you can more likely afford to lose Chris than you could Mike. I think Trey could probably step in for a few games and fill Mike's role, but not for a long-term period of time. In the aggregate, you take Trey Palmer or Raheem Jarrett, they can kind of fill that X spot, and you can have success. But for Baker, I think you're looking at the same stats around somewhere similar to last year. Yeah. Maybe the picks go up because he feels a little more comfortable, right? He's not as conservative. He's got the contract. Maybe the touchdowns go up because of the additions on offense. The yardage goes up a little bit because of the new system and scheme and stuff like that. But I think the offense as a whole, with Cohen at the helm, and I was talking about this because I didn't know we were off. I just thought you were off. So I was talking to fans about no one could hear me because we were obviously shut down. But talking about the offense and kind of the similarities, like last year they had Dave Canales' offense, which was a product of McVay's offense to an extent, right? It was through Shane Waldron who we learned that from, not directly from McVay. And it had, a bit of Darrell Bevel in it. It had a bit of Schottenheimer in it, had a little bit of Pete Carroll in it. And it's kind of this love child of all those. Where Cohen's coming, he's got his own twist on it, but this is right from the McVay tree. I mean, McVay, he was the offensive coordinator for Sean McVay. This is like directly from where he learned how to run a pro style offense. And there's going to be a lot of similarities, a lot of movement, a lot of setting things up. We saw that this past week with Sean Tucker's run on that, fake wide receiver jet.
Yeah.
It was a handoff up the gut. Sean Tucker got some good gainage on that. And then they went back to it later in the game and made it a play action pass. And Cody Thompson caught a 12-yard pass up the sideline to move the sticks. Same look, same formation, a lot of different boots. And that's the thing I think, they're giving putting a lot more on Baker's plate, on these quarterbacks' plate, and saying, all right, we get to the line. We've got a couple different things we can check into, If this is what it is, then we're going to check into this. If this is what it is, we're going to check into this. And the thing about that is it's all the same look. So I think that's one of the things that really gives me a lot of encouragement is the motion, the movement, and being able to run multiple things out of the same look and keeping defenders off kilt and not really kind of knowing what you're doing until you snap the ball. And at that point, it could be too late. So I think the offense is going to outperform what they did last year. Certainly in the running game. I think this running game has the ability to be climb up from 32nd to maybe somewhere around 17, 18. So, I don't think it's gonna be a top 10, but certainly, it's a vast improvement on what it's been the last 2 years where it's finished dead last. So, there's room for improvement. Again, you can't control, as you said, the what ifs and the what happens and health and everything going to plan. But if it stays on track to a certain point, I think you're going to see this Bucs team probably contend for the NFC South, maybe contend for a little bit more once the playoffs come around, and have a pretty productive offense that's going to match in my opinion, a pretty productive defense.
The second preseason game of the 2024 season for Tampa Bay this Saturday, 7 p.m. from Jacksonville, taking on the Jaguars. The Bucs going to be on the road once again, but their first joint practice in the books. JC, I appreciate you jumping on today's episode of the Cannon Fire Podcast and helping me recap all the highs and lows from today. Where can people find you and your great content covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Yeah, you guys can find all of my, first of all, my Twitter, JC Allen NFL. I'm your one-stop shop for all things Bucs, whether it's my own thoughts, whether it's what we got going on over at Sports Illustrated BucsGameday, where I'm a writer over there, whether it's something the Bucs are putting out, whether it's PFF stats, whether it's snap counts, all that stuff you can find on my page. I'm literally your one-stop shop. Not to not encourage you to listen to the other great voices in Tampa Bay here that are covering the team, but if you want everything in one place, my place is where you're going to find it. You can find my podcast, Pirate Parlay. We just had Levante David on last week, so go check out that episode. We had Liam Cohen, if you're looking for more insight on the way he's going to run this offense. We had Levante David on as well. Coach Todd Bowles on as well, with more guests coming down the pipeline. So you can find all that stuff there, and I'll continue to pop around here, podcast there, and anything I can do to give you all the best Bucs coverage I can.
Yeah, great insight over there, JC. Appreciate your time, my friend. Follow our show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And, of course, Buccaneer news as it happens. Last but not least, you can find myself on Instagram and Twitter at Rhetticus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back. We'll talk to you later this week as we preview the Buccaneers preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Evan Wanish will return, and look forward to that one. I'm your host, Rhett Matthew, signing off from my co-host for today, JC Allen. We'll talk to you soon. As always, thank you for listening, we'll talk to you in the next one. Go Bucs.